Okay, I think we'll start. Good morning and welcome to this part 2 of DORA for credit unions. In the first part, that was 2 weeks ago, and if you missed it, it is available also as a link, a video link. We covered 3 pillars. Today we're going to cover the remaining 2 pillars and just to look at a case study of a customer of ours. So, for those of you, and I think most of you, I was looking at the list, most of you do know us at this stage, so I won't belabor the point, but we have a few new attendees. We see ourselves, like many of you, as risk and compliance professionals, and we offer a GRC, governance, risk and compliance software, that is hosted in the cloud on AWS. We're headquartered in Ireland, although our customers are across many countries, primarily Ireland and the UK. And our clients are generally, I would say, in the financial services sector. We do have public sector as well and education, but we've a lot in the financial services space, a lot of credit unions, fund management, insurance, payments industry. We've quite a plethora now in the payments industry, electronic money, that is. Okay, that's us. Yeah, and we like to shout about the awards we win. We get shortlisted and some we win. Okay. So I've done the introductions. That's me. I'm going to have a quick DORA overview. I showed it 2 weeks ago as well. I won't delay on that slide because we've stuff I want to get through. But a quick overview to give it context. And then we'll talk about the 2 remaining pillars. That is the resilience testing and information sharing, which is more of a lintel or a plinth than a pillar. And then we look at a use case. Okay. As usual, I try to find an appropriate quote for my webinars. And this is an old one, but I like it. The testing can only show the presence of bugs, not their absence. It's like a doctor can say, we found no evidence of cancer. It's hard to prove a negative, isn't it? But Sun Tzu, and if you go back to 2,500 years ago, Sun Tzu said, sweat more in peace, bleed less in war. And I'm applying that to this is the more testing you do, the more sweating of the testing you do, the less bugs there will be and the less pain you will have later. So time invested in testing, I can tell you, is worth it always. Okay. So what is DORA? I'm sure you know at this stage. It's a regulation, it's an act, it applies to everybody equally. It's not a directive to be transposed into Irish law. No, it's a law on its own, it's an act. And it came into force in 2023. It came, I suppose, really effective for financial institutions in January of this year. So yeah, we've a bit of experience with quite a few clients who had to get the register of information done by early April. But it becomes applicable for credit unions in January 2028. So you might say, well, why are we talking about it now? Well, obviously, there's a whole bunch of you who have correctly identified that it's a good time to start now. Why wait and cram it all into the last 3 months when, you can do it at a more leisurely pace and do it right. And all I'll say to them, I'm not going to read all of these lines, but just for information, it is a harmonization of a lot of guidelines that have been out there for a while. So there's not an awful lot of new stuff in it, really. And I would be surprised if you weren't doing at least half of this already. So don't be scared. It's good stuff. There's nothing you would say it's over the top. Now, having said that, I thought the register of information was a little bit OTT, but yeah, it's a pain barrier you will get through. You will survive. So I asked this question last week. I've updated my answer a little bit. Why prepare now? Well, when is a good time to start improving your defenses? It's now. Why would you wait when the things you can and you should be doing to increase your resilience? And resilience, I put down here is your position with regard to disruption incidents. One, if you're more resilient, you'll have less incidents because things won't break in the first place. And 2, if they do break and you do have an incident, you'll be back up and running more quickly. So it keeps them short. So your uptime is higher. you're more resilient. If you start now, you'll be able to comply in a greater, time duration. You have, by my reckoning, about 119 weeks. So, that elephant, we spoke about 2 weeks ago. You've time to eat it bit by bit. If you leave it until the last 3 months, you will be stressed. So avoid the stress. And finally, why should members wait? You know you should be doing this. So why wouldn't you? If I was a member, I would be saying, why not now? Okay. We talked about the 5 pillars. These are the 5 pillars as represented by the CBI. We spoke about the other 3 2 weeks ago. Today, we're going to talk about digital operation resilience testing. I'm going to talk about collaboration, cooperation. Yeah, well, I'll cover them when I come to it, like now. On the testing, in the general part of general requirements of the Act, there's 3 articles that I think are relevant that I've picked out here, 11, 12, and 15. 11 is about response and recovery. And this is, you could say, yeah, it has something to do with testing because it's kind of understood or assumed that you have a business continuity plan. And if you've got a business continuity plan, then I'm assuming that you've done a business impact analysis, that's BIA. That's the first thing you do in preparing for business continuity. You look at the services you're providing and you look at what would be the impact if we were, for some reason or other, to be prevented from delivering this service. You look at what are the dependencies, what do we require to be able to deliver the service, and all that information is precursor to business continuity plan, and if you like, resilience and resilience testing, and indeed for the reporting you need to do for the register of information. So response and recovery. And it's about conducting the BIA. It's about periodically testing your plans. That's the essential element here with regards to testing that's in here. There's an understanding that you test them at least annually. The 12 is about backup policies and procedures. And again, you'd say, yeah, old, what is it, motherhood and apple pie. Yeah, we do backups. But have you tested a restore? I think the figure is still over 50% of the number of restores that fail usually because backups failed in the first place. So you don't know if your backup is working unless you've done a restore. Now we do about 4 times a year. I would recommend, at least twice a year that you test your restore. Article 15, probably less applicable to you guys. I think the European Supervisory Authority did develop a technical standard, the 1190, but it's, as we will see, it's more applicable to much larger organizations. So chapter 4 of the Act is where the meat is for the testing. And again, I can reduce this for you a little bit by saying Article 24 and 25, unless you're one of the larger financial institutions, 26 and 27 don't apply to you. But I put them up here for completeness. 24 is essentially have a policy that says you will test all your critical systems and your applications at least annually, and that you will address any weaknesses. Say it and do it. Okay. The biggest sin you can commit in a regulator's eyes is that you have a policy and then you don't follow your own policy. They won't beat you up and fine you for not having a policy, but they will fine you for not following your own policy. So 24 is a bit like it's governance. Have the policy, say you will do it, and make sure it happens. Article 25, this is where the essence of it is, and we'll spend a bit of time on this. I know it's a lot of small print here, but I was copying and pasting from the Act. I want you to see it in its original form. I've translated open source analysis into the more common term, open source intelligence. But let me go through it. Because when you think of testing, you'll be forgiven for thinking, oh, that's the pen test that we do here. Yes, pen test is in there. That's 1 of 10, right? but the regulator expects a little bit more than just a pen test. So vulnerability assessments and scans. Now, if I was to put it into English rather than text speak, that's, casing the joint. That's, going around testing the doors and windows at 12 o'clock at night and seeing, are any windows left open, any doors unlocked? That's what the bad guys do first. They will do a scan of your systems, your network, your applications from the outside to see, have you left any doors open? They're called ports, by the way. But yes, the same idea, same concept. Have you got old software installed that has left a door open? Because they'll be aware of all of these vulnerabilities. So they're checking to see, does your network, your systems have any of these vulnerabilities that are known? And that's their way in. So an unlocked door or an open window. Open source analysis, open source intelligence is keep your ears open, read, be gathering intelligence of what's happening in other credit unions, in other countries, because you could be next. So keep the ears open, not in the sand. Network security assessment. Well, there's a technical one. Has somebody checked your network? Is it secure? We do this once a year. I think everybody should be doing it at least once a year, hopefully. Physical security. Often, and I've seen more bad examples of physical security than good ones. You need to keep the public away from your critical systems, physically. So that's one you can certainly control. Questionnaires and scanning. Now, the questionnaires, I was struggling to see where would questionnaires be used in testing, but maybe it's asking people, your staff, depending on how many staff you have, you might need the questionnaire, but if you have a lot of staff, maybe get people to fill out a questionnaire. You might get some revelations. But scanning, yeah. Scanning and I think that's the vulnerability scanning again. Maybe scanning your network to see, is there any unauthorized software installed? Now, I'd have to ask, how did that get in there in the first place? Because in our company, you need a special username and password to install any software, and not there's only 2 of us who know that. Source code reviews. Now, I don't know if you're developing source code, but if you've got an application that was developed for you, you can ask the question, was it the source code reviewed? And that just means if person A wrote it, you want person B to review it. It's a well-known practice, if you like, in good source code development. It's a question you can ask, but not a significant one for your normal operations. Scenario-based tests. Now, this, I think, is where there's more you could do. And this is certainly, to my mind, doable and understandable by non-technical people. How this works is somebody facilitates a 2-hour session where they might say the scenario is a cyber attack. And it's 11:30 on Friday evening, and somebody is working late, on Friday evening, and clicks on a link, and all of a sudden you've got a cyber attack. How are you going to respond? And you've all senior managers around the table, and you say to them, now, how are you going to respond? And you work through that scenario, and the facilitator says, it's now 6 o'clock the following morning, it's now 12 o'clock the following day, and does what are called injects, and you play out the scenario. And trust me, I've done a number of these, and you will always find weaknesses in the plan. You're effectively testing the plan without pulling any plug, and it's safe. It's an intensive 2 hours. I'm currently preparing one for a company who want to test for, I'll call it Storm Airwind 2, because they realized that the business continuity plan didn't really cover a severe storm where people were cut off, couldn't come into the office, mobile phone, battery gone, no electricity. It's a different scenario. So if you're looking for ideas for scenarios, then I would say, let me see, I thought I wrote them down here for myself. Think of loss of buildings, loss of people, loss of systems, a severe weather event. There's 4 or 5 scenarios you could think of, and each will test a different aspect of the plan. Okay, scenarios. End of rant, but that's one I think that people totally underestimate, and it's huge benefit. Compatibility testing. if you had to work from home and you had to work on your iPad, iPad is Safari as a browser. Will you be able to access the system on a Safari browser? Is it compatible? If you have to work from a home computer, is it compatible? So compatibility means if you change systems, will things still work? And not all applications or all things are compatible with all endpoints, with all laptops, PCs. So if you're relying on it, test it. Okay. And performance testing, I think this is more, think of it, a day in a quarter where you're very busy, where systems are stressed. Do you notice a degradation maybe in the performance of the system? Because that might be an indicator that something could break if it was stressed. So check, be alert on those days and check how the performance is. End-to-end testing, I would do this after an update, and I have always done this after an update, that you do a significant update or a supplier does a significant update and you have a process, go from beginning to end, follow the process through individual steps. Maybe as a customer, see, does it still work? Those always find something. You always find something because it's not just verification, it's validation as well. And finally, the pen testing. Now, I'll talk about pen testing again in a moment, but that's the essence. And what the regulator is saying, it's proportionality. They're not expecting everything, but a bit of a variety, okay, in the testing. 26 is about advanced tools. It's about threat-led penetration testing. I'm going to talk to you about that, but I don't think it's applicable to you guys, so I'm not going to waste too much time on it. And then 27 are the requirements for those people doing the threat-led penetration testing. Talking to Sandy about today, and she said, wouldn't it be a good idea to put in some less technical stuff that people can do? Because I know most of you on the call here are non-technical. So things you can do that will give you a little bit of certain comfort that some of the things you've in place are working, like password strength. And I'm kind of referring back to the thematic review the regulator did, where they found that people were using old passwords or very weak passwords. Not acceptable in today's day and age, honestly. To have admin passwords that you didn't change, or to have a password that's password 123. I mean, the bad guys have a script they run and they test, all the easy passwords straight off. And 20% of passwords in the world are guessable within minutes, So minimum 12 characters, I would say. Uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters. And we have another one that we put in there that you can't use any character more than 3 times, for example. Password age, yeah. I think if password is 5 years old, it's probably not strong enough, by the way. Multi-factor authentication, something you have, something you know, something you have, something you are, combination of these. Is it working effectively? Have people found ways to bypass it or simple, so just check that it is working and that there's not a sharing of the information, that it is working as you expect. A big thing is movers, joiners, and leavers. You have a policy to say that when somebody leaves, you'll remove all access rights. Do you? If John is leaving today, end of the month, moving to a new job, when will you remove his access rights? Tonight at 5 o'clock, or maybe next Monday. So he's full access over the weekend. There's no excuse for that. If you have a policy and procedures, follow them. Do it. Again, this was found in the thematic review that there was people were lax in those things. And check. You can check, as if you're the CEO, you can check if somebody left last month, did we remove their access rights and when do we remove them? And make a note of that, the fact that you checked. That is testing resilience in one sense. And this is another favorite. Who has access to what? And when was the last time you checked? So somebody joins the company and you give them access to certain resources that they need for their job. They move in their job to some other role. Their access should change. Now, I remember in a previous life, many years ago, somebody coming to me and saying they were in the company 14 years and they reckoned they had access to everything at this stage. And I said, really? Well, you won't tomorrow. And she said to me, she said, I thought you'd say that. And what it was is she'd worked in customer service, she'd worked in finance, she'd worked in HR even. I mean, it was insane. But that's when we introduced our movers policy, joiners, movers, and leavers. So basically, when somebody joins, you give them access. When they leave, you take it away. When they move, you adjust it. The regulator found this as well, that people had access not appropriate to the role. So these things you can do to follow your own policies, folks. And finally, on this one, I'm assuming you all did a business continuity test. Well, can you confirm that you stayed within your recovery time objective and the recovery point objective? And if you did, note it, because that's an important confirmation of something you've tested. Okay, let's move on. And maybe I covered this last week, the thematic review, but I wanted to pick out 3 points in the thematic review that the regulator has found. So see if you're also deficient in these areas. Pen tests were deficient. And that was generally and specifically they said poor objectives. Poor objectives. But you're getting the techie guys to do a pen test. Yes, but you set the scope. You tell them what to test broadly, and they'll confirm to you what the objectives are. If I'm looking at somebody else's pen test, I want to know what was the scope of the test. What did they actually test? What were they looking for? So I'm going to answer a question before you ask it. Give me 5 things, that you should test. I haven't got them up here, but just in my notes. You want them to find vulnerabilities. Okay, so if you have left doors open, or in tech speak, ports, if you are using old TLS like 1.0, 1.1 as a protocol, communications protocol, you want them to find those vulnerabilities so that you can fix them. You want them to assess your security controls. So you got a username and password to get into the system with the application. If I try multiple attempts, do I get locked out after 15 or 5 failed attempts? Those sort of things. So are they going to test the security controls you've in place? 3, compliance with standards. And this is a key one. This is, you hope that every pen tester is checking your compliance with OWASP, OWASP, and SANS, SANS. These are the top 2, I would say, guidelines where they give advice and say, your applications, your system should comply with these. And they're things they'll test against. So they should be coming back and saying, you're good for OWASP, good for SANS, you comply. What else? When a pen tester does a test, they can do authenticated and unauthenticated. Unauthenticated is when they try to break in from the outside, and authenticated is you've given them access and now they're trying to break sideways. And if they cause a breach, if they manage to break sideways, if it's a live system, they won't do any damage. They will stop and they will tell you. But you want them to tell you, what could you have done? What could you see? What could you have changed? So the objective would be to identify any damage you could have caused if you'd got in. You'd again assume that that's, don't I get that anyway? Spell it out. And finally, I would say you want them to validate your defenses. If you say we have defenses to prevent unauthorized access or to detect a brute force attack or to detect a distributed denial of service, that's where somebody pays somebody in the dark web to get 10,000 computers to put in a request at the same time, and you get bombarded. It's because there's so many requests, your system falls over, and the bad guys hoping it falls over open. That's called a DDoS, DDoS, a DDoS attack. And you can test for that. Certainly in ours, we're in Amazon. If when the guys do a DDoS attempt, Amazon actually shut it down. We benefit from the technology, from the Amazon technology. But again, is it tested? So a bit more formal setting of the objectives, and I'm just giving you 5 there. So okay, what else do the regulators say? Continuity testing was not in contracts. Now, you might have had contracts with your suppliers for years, and you didn't think about it 5 years ago. Well, if you're renewing or updating, put testing in there, continuity testing. And maybe that they participate in your testing as well. I'd have that in the contract, certainly, and the regulator wants to see it. And finally, the other item that the regulator bemoaned was the lack of interruption scenarios. We spoke about this earlier. If you're only doing the cyber attack scenario, but you haven't thought about a fire or a flood or a pandemic, or think of other scenarios that would disrupt you, not just the cyber attack. Okay, something that would bring the systems down. I mean, it's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If the ESP is gone for a week, storm AO, and it is possible. Have you a generator? Have you a UPS? How much diesel do you have in the generator? How long will it last? Do you know the answers to these questions? Okay, end of rant. End of rant. Okay, I said I'd mention the article, I suppose 25 it was, on the threat-led penetration testing. And this applies to larger organizations. And you can see if you're one of these 7 here, then yeah, you're caught in that as well. It's a lot of work. I'm not going to read these out, but I don't think any of you are globally, systemically important. I haven't looked at the list this morning, but so I think you're okay. But it is interesting to see what it would involve. The whole process, it's following what's referred to as the TIBER-EU process. TIBER as in, it was an EU thing years ago that they spelled it out for, and it was again for larger institutions. They always have to give it a name, they're like rivers. This is a 6-month project, right? I'm not going to go through it in detail, but I just thought you'd be interested in what is this threat-led penetration testing all about. And it's about starting with looking at the general threat landscape. What could happen? Where are the threats coming from? Having a credible scenario, right? You'd have to engage some external experts, the threat intelligence providers, because we're not looking at that every day. We're not the experts. You're not the experts. So you're involving certainly third parties who will tell you what the threats are and what you need to prepare for and defend against. Then you need to engage, I'm going to call it the red team, the people who are going to attack you in a scenario. It's going to be a live attack on your systems. And they're the red team. And those of you who know red and blue teaming, the blue team is the guys who are defending. And they know nothing about this plan. They have not been told this is going to happen in 3 months' time. And actually, you have to keep it secret from them. And it's only the white team, and it could be one person internally, who is in the know. Now, try and keep that secret in a large organization, but that's the idea. And then the TLPT cyber team, the regulator, also has a NOR in the mix, and is ensuring that what you're doing is appropriate for your organization. So lots of people involved, lots of time consumed. So, like I said, I don't think it applies to you, but yeah, interesting. So I thought I'd have a quick look again in case you're feeling overwhelmed by DORA. DORA is in 6 of the 15 guidelines. Now, the others, I would say they're governance, but what I'm trying to say with these 2 slides is you're doing a lot of this already if you're following the cross-industry guidelines on outsourcing. So there is a lot of overlap. Think of Venn diagram, and you're doing a lot of this already. So just continue. Okay, that's all I wanted to say on that. It's not a perfect overlap, but there is a lot of commonality. Remember, DORA is a harmonization of all those guides. So it's including certainly all the good bits. And to information sharing. And I'm sharing with you one of my favorite cartoons that I think sums it up. Well, I'll give you a moment to view and read and smile. Sharing is good. Sharing is good for you learn more. You have less surprises. And I always think the bad guys share. The bad guys share vulnerabilities. So why not let us good guys also share? The article you have to read is Article 45, but I've got the summary of it here in this slide. I know it's a lot of words, but you get a copy of these. You can read it in detail. But basically, Article 45 is saying you may exchange. Nobody can compel you to share information, but certainly encourage it. And I know that certainly in Ireland, credit unions organise themselves in chapters. And certainly within that chapter, I could imagine an information sharing forum, but it might even be better to have a national forum. I'm not aware if there is one and you're aware of it. If you put it in the chat or in the Q&A here, I'll share it with everybody. But it's about, you may exchange information. I mean, if you've had an attack, do you keep it quiet? No, I would say share it with your peers, because even though there might be a competitor in one sense, you're all in the same boat. It is a great analogy. And it's the boat of, the economic and the financial system. So why wouldn't you share it with peers? You do not want to see anybody getting attacked and getting brought down. So what the regulator says, the sharing must be carried out in a trusted group. You got to protect sensitive information as well, that you can't, you got to consider GDPR and other sensitive information that might be organizational sensitive, that the CEO wouldn't be happy if the IT guy was sharing sensitive, competitive information. You got to comply with laws, with like data protection laws and confidentiality. But you still can do the sharing while complying with all of these laws. Now, if you're going to do it formally, define the conditions for participation. Decide, if you're setting up a group, do you involve the regulator in this? They'd want to be involved, but you decide that. Do you involve the third-party suppliers? I think absolutely, because a lot of you share the same third-party suppliers. But so yeah, have them in that tent, I would say. Do you use a particular application where you share the information that you all have access to? These are things you kind of set up beforehand, because if you're part of that group that's going to lead this and you want others to join, because it only gets really beneficial if you've got lots of people joining, you need to set up a solid, secure environment where people can share. Okay. Just a couple of things to point out. Protect sensitive information. These are concerns that you'll have read about. Certainly I have. And have rules of conduct. The one that is often quoted is the Chatham House rule. You keep the information, it's shared internally, and you don't share the details of who said it. It's all anonymous when you leave that room. And if you do learn of personal data in that room, you treat it the way you would any personal information in an operational capacity. So it's about trust. It really is about trust. So set up the environment where that trust can be won. Okay. And if you need encouragement as to why share, because it's the risks affect the entire financial system. You're all affected if one fails. And everybody benefits from the collective intelligence, And if you're aware earlier, you can adjust your defenses. If it's a vulnerability that you need to patch and somebody's been exposed and you're tardy, it might give you that kick to address it. Okay. Yeah, some of my own notes now. The others were from the regulation. Yeah, a network or a group, set it up. There are some out there, but they mightn't be specific to credit unions. So you might want to talk to people about maybe having one specifically for credit unions. You can share information anonymized. It doesn't have to always have a name in it, so it might be easier. There are platforms out there. Again, maybe you need a section on it for credit unions, but a lot of the threat intelligence, the bad guys don't care. They don't care what the sector is. If you've got a weakness, they'll find you, and the sector you're in is secondary. You do see some attacks on sectors, but I often think that a lot of people caught in the crossfire because they had vulnerabilities, not because they were in a particular sector. Yeah, do engage and collaborate with the National Cybersecurity Centre, both in Ireland and the UK. These are great sources of threat intelligence as well, so you should be engaged with them in any case, as a minimum. And if you learn something, and if you know of some phishing scam that's going around, tell your staff. That we see these at least once a month, that we would share. Okay. Now, I'm running out of time because I wanted to give time for Q&A, but very quickly, a customer of ours, they're in the payment sector. Now, it's not a credit union because We have some credit unions who are starting on the DORA journey, but none that I felt had gone far enough down to be a good example. But this is a company in the payment sector. I've just left their name out of it, and they said they need to satisfy both DORA and the Register of Information and the CBI's outsourcing requirements. They need to submit an outsourcing register, their electronic payments, electronic money company, and they need to have a third-party risk register. So that was what they wanted. They started by documenting all their services that they provide and all the activities. It might be one activity per service, but they were documenting in a bit more detail. And some of those activities are licensed, and certainly for DORA, I think there were 123 licensed activities that you had to refer to. And one of the changes in DORA was people wanted to record an activity, but it wasn't licensed. So there's a 124th one. It's just called supporting. It's the only unlicensed one in the list. Anyway, just to document everything. Now, if you've done a BIA, you've probably a lot of this work done already. The business impact assessment, where you identify the dependencies. And in particular for DORA, what the regulator wants to see is those dependencies on third parties. Now, the regulator will say ICT third parties, as in information, communications, and technology. But the word in the street is that the next step for DORA is they want all third parties. What this company wanted was they wanted all third parties at day one. They said, why would they only do this for the ICT third parties? They felt it'd be better if they did everything, and then they could identify which ones were relevant for DORA. Now, when they started doing this, they discovered that they were missing a lot of information about third parties. I mean, some contracts, they didn't have any renewal date or any end date. They had a start date, and that was it. They didn't have, I'm just trying to think, what can I say? Look, there's a lot of information that the regulator needs. I think it's, to some extent, you might say it's a bit over the top, but it's good for business. And when they started doing this, they realized where the gaps were in terms of information. I mean, one of them was the contract ID. Every contract has to have a unique ID. Most of our customers, I can tell you now, didn't have a formal ID in a contract, but they do now. You could get the legal department maybe to come up with a scheme, because they generally will have unique identifiers on contracts. And the other thing that emerged for this company was that they had no visibility of the fourth parties, or referred to, I think, in the DORA as subcontractors. And for the most part, their contracts were silent on it. So one of the things they're planning to do is to change the contracts, that they need to be in the loop. If a third party is signing up a fourth party, then they want to know about that and to authorize it. So yeah, with this, it's kind of three modules in our software. They were able to satisfy both DORA, the Register of Information requirements, just that part, and the outsourcing register for the CPI. But looking further in DORA, and we covered it 2 weeks ago about the incident register, you need to record incidents, and you need to inform the regulator if it's a major incident. So these guys have, under our registers module, 2 forms for incidents, one for, I'm going to call it a small incident, and one for major incident. And the major incident form is 76 fields on it. The minor one has about, I'm going to say 15, 20. You need to have an ICT asset register. We have one. We don't have a lot of IT assets, but it's important to know things like, when did you purchase it? How old is it? When is it out of warranty? And maybe it's time to replace it. And if you have all that piece of information in one place, it's easier to have the overview. If you have a lot of IT systems and you have information on a lot of them, you only can guarantee protection of information if you know everywhere that information is stored. And if you don't have an IT asset register, the regulator will ask you why. So it's only a matter of time. And other things that, like conflicts, you can record now. A lot of people have very few conflicts. Maybe it's an Excel spreadsheet, but they're recording them all in the registers module. Now, you need a risk register anyway. But when you outsource to third parties, your organization gets extended and the risks you take on have just been added to. I mean, what if the third party fails? What if, if they have an interruption? That's a new risk for you. And that's only one. What if one of their fourth parties fails? Somebody that they've outsourced part of that critical service to, how does it impact you? And if they're going to other countries, you might need to look at country risks, if that fourth party is in a country and they breach the rules in that country and they get suspended, something that happened in Estonia all of a sudden now is affecting you. So be aware of those risks. Now, you don't need separate risk registers, but you certainly need to be able to identify the risks associated with third parties. Hence, these arrows are one to many. So a third party can be associated with many risks. A business service can be dependent on more than one third party. A third party can have more than one fourth party, and so on and so on. And finally, this customer now, they had most of the third parties set up and they'd done the due diligence 2, 3, 5 years ago. But they decided that really they need to keep an eye on their third parties, on their financial well-being, and consider it key risk indicators. But they do ongoing due diligence. That DD is due diligence, and just keep a check on the third party. They don't want surprises. They don't want to wake up one morning to hear they're gone out of business, or they're no longer want to provide this business. Now, the regulator would say you need an exit strategy. I would say an exit strategy and no surprises. So keep your eye on your third parties. This is just examples, running out of time, of the 2 reports. You can see one of them. This is what I call the human-readable report, with the identification of the bits that are missing. 86% of failures in the dry run last year were because of missing information. And the second one here is the CPI one. They're just outputs. And by the way, these reports are not just one page. They're 15 pages on an Excel spreadsheet for DORA, for the register of information. My final slide, okay? And this applies to all of, well, it applies to today. Start with Article 24, and have a testing program, and have a few different tests. You don't have to have all of them, depending on your size, proportionality. If you're big, the regulator will expect more from you. Keep aware of the threats and vulnerabilities. Just be gathering that intelligence and act on it. Hopefully it is actionable intelligence. Here's a good one. Test a restore of your backup, because you will learn a lot from that restore. Read Article 45. That's about information sharing. If you need more encouragement, but just read it and consider how you might do this. And guys, start now. Why wait? Start now, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit you can do, but work out a plan over the next, what did I say, 119 weeks. Eminently doable if you start now. And that's me. I used up most of the time. I didn't need much time for Q&A, but if you have, I see there's one there, so I shall have a look. From Mick, how far will ISO 27001 and ISO 22301 bring you towards achieving DORA compliance? Are there other ISOs we should consider? That's a very good question. Okay, first of all, for everybody, ISO 27001 is information security, and ISO 22301 is business continuity. There is one business resilience as well. I think it's ISO 60000. 27001 is a good information security standard. It's the standard in certainly this side of the Atlantic. But don't, how will I put it? Look at ISO 27035 as well, because 27001 does very little on incident management. But 27035, which is a companion to the 27001, goes into details in incident management. 22301, I think, is a good one. I've followed the evolution of that one from back when it was the BS 17799, the precursor to it. Yes, you would go a long way towards doing it. If you want another one, look at NIST, NIST 2. It's American. It's free, downloadable. but it describes the outcomes, not the how. It gives you examples of how, but it tells you more what you want to achieve. They will bring you a long way. But when I think of ISO 27001, um, um, it's focused on the controls. I would say read NIST 2 as well, because it focuses on the outcomes, and you can decide how you want to achieve that outcome. So it depends. It depends on what whether you want a certificate. If you want a certificate, then 27001 and 22301. Yes, a long way is the answer, Mick. A long way. Anything else? Okay. All very quiet. Lisa, I will say a date for your diary. We're doing for credit unions, we're doing a one-day workshop where we're going to for the non-technical, I would say, IT risk management workshop for the non-technical, and try and give non-technical people some ideas and insight and tools to be able to do that risk management, IT risk management. Recommendations for managing the register of information. Lisa. Oh. The question is, do we have any recommendations for managing the register of information? What I would say is, whenever there's a change in the contract, think of all the information they want in the register of information. And it's a lot about dates and test. When did you last test the business continuity plan? When did the third party test their business continuity plan? So that in every process, in every step where you're doing testing, there's probably something you need to update. And I would say update it as you go along, because it is dynamic, and you don't want to, 2 weeks before the report is due, to say, oh God, we better update the register. So I think it's an ongoing thing, and maybe in your other processes, have as just a step, what do we need to update? Update the register of information. I mean, from what I've seen, and we had about 20 customers who got through this earlier this year, the big task was gathering all the information in the first place. I mean, you had to get LEI, that's the legal entity identifier, LEI, from all your third parties. And the third parties were saying, sure, we don't have an LEI. We have an Irish or a UK company registration number. Well, the regulation said you had to have the LEI. We bought an LEI. We bought it for 3 years, and it took me about 10 minutes to do it, and it costs about €65. I'm telling you, a lot less stress than trying to argue it. Just so that was one of the tough things for people, because the third parties didn't have them. But no, gathering the information initially was a huge chore. But once you have it, build it into your other policies. I think that's it, folks. I think we've gone over the time, but hopefully I've given you some motivation to start now and taken a little bit of the mystery away from it. It's all eminently doable and worthwhile doing. So I'll leave you with that. Start now. And we'll see some of you certainly on the 13th of November in Portlaoise. Thank you. Bye-bye.